Every night, my husband would lock our 19-year-old daughter's bedroom door. I'd hear the bed creaking for an hour, then absolute silence. When I discovered what he was doing in there, my world collapsed. Hi, my dear ones. God bless each and every one of you on the other side of this screen. My name is Margaret Ellen Sullivan. I'm 52 years old, and I live here in Marietta, Georgia. This charming little town in Cobb County, just northwest of Atlanta, known for our beautiful town square and the annual Taste of Marietta Festival that brings the whole community together. I was born right here, in this blessed land, and this is where I planted my roots. Oh, my dear friends, you don't know how much I love this art of baking. I started about 3 years ago when a neighbor on my street taught me. Mrs. Henderson, God rest her soul, she's passed on now. She used to make these cornbread muffins that were absolutely divine. One day, I was walking past her house and smelled that wonderful aroma coming from her kitchen. Mrs. Henderson, I said, would you teach me how to make those muffins? And she welcomed me with open arms. Every Saturday morning I'd go over there, bring the ingredients, and we'd spend time kneading dough, talking about life, about our children, about our struggles. It was like therapy, you know? Today I make cornbread, biscuits, banana bread, cheese rolls, and there's always extra to share with the neighbors. I love seeing their happy faces when I deliver a warm bag to their door. This morning, before recording this video for you, I just finished a batch of cheddar biscuits. The smell is still filling the whole house. It's a recipe I learned from my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, modified a bit the way Mrs. Henderson taught me. I stand there in the kitchen, hands in the dough, and it feels like all the problems in the world stay outside. And you, my dear friends watching me now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with breakfast, after lunch watching TV, or later in the afternoon when things settle down? I always read all the comments and get so emotional knowing where you're from and when you take time from your busy day to listen to this grandmother's stories from Marietta. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of love that goes from Georgia across the entire country. Oh, and don't forget to hit that like button down below and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, because I have many more stories to tell you. Hit the bell too, because there's a new video every week from this grandmother. But listen, folks, today I came here to talk to you about something very serious, a situation I lived through years ago that completely changed my life. It's about my daughter, my Julia, and about how sometimes we can live with someone for years and not truly know who they are inside. A story that left me heartbroken, but ultimately brought me a strength I didn't even know I had. Look, my dear ones, for you to fully understand this story, I first need to tell you about my family and what life was like when I was a child, right here in Marietta. I was born in 1973, in a small house on Maple Street, close to the downtown square. My father was named James Sullivan, a strong name, isn't it? And he worked as a construction worker. My mother, Eleanor, took care of the house and us children. There were 4 of us, me, the oldest, then my brother Thomas, 2 years younger, my sister Dorothy, and the baby William. Our house was small, brick with vinyl siding, with 2 bedrooms in front and 2 in back. We had a big backyard where my mother planted her herbs, mint, basil, rosemary, and there was always a peach tree loaded with fruit that was our joy in the summer. I remember as if it were yesterday the mornings in our house. I'd wake up early to the sound of the neighbor's rooster, Mr. Peterson's. My mother was already in the kitchen, turning on the stove to make coffee. The smell of coffee mixed with the aroma of whatever she was baking is a memory I hold dear to this day. She'd always make cornbread or buttermilk biscuits to go with it, and we'd sit at the kitchen table, a small wooden table my father had made himself. My father would leave early for work, always with the lunchbox my mother prepared, a sandwich, some chips, maybe some leftover meatloaf when we had it, and always sweet tea in a thermos. He was a hard-working, honest man, but quite serious. He wasn't much of a talker, you know. But when he came home, he'd always bring us something: candy, a donut he bought at the corner store, or old newspapers that we loved to make paper airplanes with. My childhood was simple, but full of joy. I played a lot with the girls on the street, hide and seek in the late afternoon when the sun was low, hopscotch on the driveway, and my favorite game was playing house. I'd make dollhouses under the peach tree with broken tiles I found around the yard, little stones that became furniture, and big leaves that served as blankets. My best friend was named Patricia. She was the daughter of Mrs. Whitmore, who lived 2 houses down from ours. Patricia had beautiful curly brown hair that her mother always tied with colorful ribbons. We two were inseparable. We'd invent games. We'd make pretend food with mud and leaves, play school. I always wanted to be the teacher and she the student. And when it rained, we'd spend hours on the porch listening to stories Mrs. Whitmore told about the old days when ladies got married in white dresses and veils. At school, which was about 5 blocks from home, I was a good student. I always loved studying. My first grade teacher was named Mrs. Johnson, a petite lady with white hair always pulled back in a bun, but who had tremendous energy. She taught me with such care that I was enchanted with each new letter I learned. I remember she always said, "Margaret, dear, education is the only inheritance no one can take from you." I'd carry my lunch in a little metal lunchbox that my mother decorated with stickers. Inside, there were always homemade cookies and a thermos with lemonade she made herself. During recess, Patricia and I would sit under the oak tree in the schoolyard and share our lunches. Afternoons at home were full of activities. I'd help my mother with chores, sweeping the porch, feeding the chickens we kept in the backyard, helping fold laundry. I remember carrying the laundry basket, trying to help like the older girls did, and feeling important helping at home. When July 4th came around, our house became a party. My mother made potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, and my father set up the grill in the backyard. All the neighbors would come to our house, and the kids would wave sparklers until late at night. Mrs. Whitmore always brought her brother-in-law Henry, who played guitar and sang old country songs that made the adults dance in the yard. It was a simple life, but full of love and family unity. My parents, though not overly demonstrative with affection, always took good care of all 4 of us. There was never a lack of food on the table, clean clothes, and especially respect. My father never raised his hand to any of us, and my mother always raised us with dignity and values. But like every family has its peculiarities, ours did too. There was something I noticed from a young age, but only fully understood years later when I was an adult and a mother myself. It was about relationships, about how people can hide dark sides behind smiles and kind words. A painful lesson that only life itself can teach. In those childhood years, running through the backyard and playing under the peach tree, I had no idea how much I would need that solid foundation my parents gave me to face the challenges that were coming. My dear ones, now I need to tell you how everything started to change in my life. It was 1991, I had just turned 18, and that was the year I met Robert. He was 26 years old, a construction foreman here in Marietta, very respected in town. Everyone knew his work. Robert Davenport was his full name. He built several houses in the new subdivisions that were popping up at the time. I met him at a wedding reception for Mr. Henderson's daughter at the church hall downtown. I remember I was wearing a light blue dress that my mother had sewn especially for the party. She always had magic hands for sewing. Robert was there, very elegant, in dress pants and a crisp white shirt. He was handsome, tall, dark hair always well combed with gel, and he had a way of speaking that impressed everyone. When he came to talk to me, I got all shy. "Miss, may I have the pleasure of knowing your name?" he said, even taking off his hat. Such manners, right? My mother, who was beside me, was so proud. "This is my daughter Margaret," she answered for me, because I was speechless from shyness. Robert started visiting me at home every Sunday after church. My father liked him from day one. "This young man is a hard worker, Margaret," my father would say, "not some bum wasting your time." Robert always brought something: candy for me, a pack of cigarettes for my father, and always greeted my mother with great respect. During our courtship, He was too perfect. Too perfect, you know? Today I understand that when someone is too perfect, something's wrong. But back then, at 18, I thought I'd found my prince charming. Robert was never late for dates, always well-dressed, always with a rose or chocolates for me. He talked about our future so lovingly. "Margaret, when we get married, I'm going to build you a beautiful house. It'll have 2 bedrooms, a large living room, a spacious kitchen where you'll make your cakes." We got married in March 1993. I was 20, he was 28. The wedding was small but nice, at the same church hall where we met. Robert had kept his promise. He built our new house in the Kennesaw subdivision, right here in the area. It was beautiful. White with blue shutters, with a big backyard where I planted my herbs and flowers. The first months of marriage were like a dream. Robert was affectionate, attentive, took me to the movies when there was a new film, bought me nice fabric to make dresses. I was on cloud 9. I took care of the house with so much love, made the foods he liked. He always loved fried chicken with gravy and meatloaf with mashed potatoes. It was in September 1995 that my Julia was born. Oh, my dear ones, what joy it was when I brought that girl into the world. Robert got so emotional he cried at the hospital door. "Margaret, you gave me the most precious thing in the world," he said, holding our baby girl so carefully. But it was exactly after Julia's birth that I started noticing certain changes in Robert. At first, I thought it was all in my head, you know. Those normal fatherly jealousies. He'd watch too closely when I bathed the baby, when I changed her diaper. "Margaret, don't you think you're taking too long in the room with Julia?" he'd ask, somewhat impatiently. Julia grew up beautiful, smart, but always very quiet. She wasn't a rowdy child like others. Even as a toddler, she had a withdrawn manner that caught my attention. When she turned 2 and started talking, it was always softly, as if afraid to bother anyone. "Mommy," she'd say whispering, pulling on my skirt. She was too obedient, you know? Too obedient. Robert started getting more controlling with me, too. "Margaret, you don't need to go to your mother's house so much," he'd say. "A wife's place is at home, taking care of the family." At first I accepted it, thought it was care, that he loved me so much he wanted me all to himself. My foolishness, right? When Julia turned 5, in 2000, Robert insisted she not go to daycare. "The girl is better at home with you, Margaret. Those daycares are full of diseases, badly behaved children." I thought it was strange, because all the neighborhood mothers put their children in daycare so they could learn to interact with other kids. But he was so convincing that I agreed. Julia grew increasingly withdrawn. When she had little friends over, she'd always play somewhat apart. And the worst, every time Robert came home from work, she'd run to our room and hide. "Julia is afraid of men," I'd tell myself. "It's just a shy child thing." It was when she was 8 that I started noticing stranger things. Robert had created a routine of talking with Julia every night. "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl about school, about behavior," he'd say after dinner. And off he'd go to her room, close the door, and stay there for a long time. At first, I thought it was nice. What a dedicated father, I'd think. He's teaching our daughter about life. But there was something that bothered me. Julia would always be very quiet during these conversations. I'd be in the kitchen washing dishes or ironing clothes, and it was a strange silence coming from the room. One night, when Julia was 9, I decided to pay more attention. Robert had just entered her room and closed the door as always. I finished putting away the dishes and went to our bedroom, which was on the wall next to Julia's room. I pressed my ear to the wall, and what I heard made my heart race. It was a rhythmic sound, like someone tapping on the bed, but tapping slowly, in a constant rhythm. And along with that sound, I heard Robert's voice speaking low. "That's right, stay still. It's for your own good." My God, my mind went to the most terrible place. Could my husband be? No, it couldn't be. Robert was an upstanding man, hard-working, respected. He must be teaching Julia something, maybe showing her a book, some exercise. But that rhythmic sound, that "stay still," my heart was pounding. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, until Robert came out of the room an hour later. When he entered our bedroom, I tried to act natural, pretending I was arranging clothes in the closet. "Robert," I said, trying to sound casual, "what were you teaching Julia today?" "Oh, we talked about respect, about obedience," he replied, already taking off his shirt. "The girl needs to learn from an early age to behave properly." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing in bed, thinking about that strange sound, those words, and especially thinking about Julia's behavior lately. Always looking down, always scared, always avoiding looking at her father. The next day, when Robert left for work, I tried to talk to Julia. "Honey, what does Daddy talk to you about in the room?" I asked, while she ate breakfast. Julia stopped chewing, stared at her plate, and then whispered, "He teaches me things that girls need to know, Mommy." "What kind of things, my love?" "Things about how to be obedient, how not to bother anyone." There was something in her voice, in the way she averted her gaze, that worried me even more. But I still couldn't imagine the terrible truth that was to come. I still believed my husband was a good man, and that my mind was creating fantasies where there was nothing more than a strict father educating his daughter. How wrong I was. How terribly wrong. My dear ones, what I'm about to tell you now are the most difficult years of my life. After that first night, when I heard those strange sounds, my life became a hell of doubts and fears. For months, every night was the same torture. Robert would enter Julia's room, lock the door, and I'd be there in the kitchen or in our room, heart in my throat, trying to understand what was happening. Julia grew up, but it wasn't normal growth, you know. When she turned 10, I started noticing something different about her development. At school, teachers kept calling me in for meetings. "Mrs. Sullivan," said Mrs. Crawford, who was her 4th grade teacher, "Julia has a lot of difficulty concentrating. She always seems to be in her own world." That's when I took her to Dr. Morrison, that old doctor here in Marietta, who practiced at the clinic on South Cobb Drive. After several tests and conversations, he explained, "Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter has what we call ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. That's why she has so much difficulty in school, always seems distracted." When I told Robert, he got furious. "Doctors don't know anything, Margaret. The girl doesn't have any illness. What she has is lack of discipline, of firm education. That's why I talk to her every night, to bring order to that head." And these conversations kept getting longer, more frequent. It wasn't just at night anymore. On Saturday mornings, when I went to the grocery store, Robert stayed home with Julia. "Go on, Margaret. I'll take the opportunity to give the girl some important lessons." When I returned, I'd find Julia always very quiet, sometimes with red eyes from crying. "Julia, why are you crying, my love?" "It's nothing, Mommy. It's just that Daddy explained some things to me, and I got sad." "What kind of things?" "He said I'm different from other girls, that I need to learn to accept the things life brings, even when it hurts." My God, how does a 10, 11-year-old child say something like that? "Even when it hurts," she said. That phrase hammered in my head for weeks. I started noticing other details. Julia always had little marks on her legs. When I asked, she'd say she'd fallen at school, that she'd bumped into the corner of a table. But there were too many falls, too many bumps, and always on her legs, always in places her school uniform covered. Once, she was in the bath, and I went in to bring a towel. I saw purple marks on her back, like welts. "Julia, what's this on your back?" "Oh, Mommy, I fell off Patricia's bike." The neighbor's daughter had a bike the girls played with. But Patricia lived far from home, and Julia almost never left the house to play. Something wasn't adding up. I went to talk to Patricia's mother, Mrs. Whitmore. "Sarah, has Julia been playing a lot on Patricia's bike?" "Oh, Margaret, I haven't seen Julia at our house in a long time." The girl hardly goes out, right? There it was. Julia had lied. Another lie to cover something. But cover what? The worst was at night. Every single night, the same routine. Robert finished dinner, took a walk in the backyard, lit a cigarette, and then said, "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl." And off he'd go to Julia's room, with that key in his hand, to lock the door from inside. I'd stay in the kitchen, washing dishes, but with my ears alert. I'd always hear that rhythmic sound, like someone hitting something. And Robert's voice, always low, always controlled. "This is for you to learn. You need to understand this is for your own good. Stop whimpering and stay still." One night, I couldn't take it anymore. It was 2006. Julia was 11. Robert had been in her room for about 20 minutes. I left the kitchen and went to the room door. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard clearly, whack, whack, whack. It was a dry sound like wood hitting something, and along with it, Julia's muffled crying. It wasn't loud crying, it was soft sobbing, like someone trying not to make noise. "Stop crying. This here is to take the laziness out of your body, for you to learn to be a decent person." My blood ran cold. He was hitting my daughter. Robert was beating Julia with something, in the locked room. That's why the rhythmic sound, that's why the marks on her body, that's why she lived so scared. I ran to our room, sat on the bed and started shaking. My legs turned to jelly. My husband, the man I loved, was torturing our daughter every night. And I, idiot that I was, thinking he was educating her. When Robert came out of Julia's room an hour later, he entered our bedroom as if nothing had happened. He was even humming softly. "Robert," I said, trying to disguise the tremor in my voice, "what do you do in Julia's room every day?" "I already explained, Margaret. Educating that girl. She's hard-headed, needs a firm hand. My father raised me this way, and I became a good man. If I don't give her some corrections, she'll become a tramp." "But what kind of corrections?" "Some spankings. Nothing major. A child without discipline becomes nothing in life." Spankings. He called it spankings. But I had clearly heard the sound of wood hitting, had seen the marks on Julia's body. Those weren't spankings. It was systematic beating, planned torture. From that night on, I couldn't live in peace anymore. Every day was agony waiting for the time Robert would go to Julia's room. And every night, I'd hear my daughter suffer silently on the other side of the wall. I tried to talk to her several times, but Julia was so scared she wouldn't say anything. "My love, if Daddy is doing something that hurts you, you can tell me." "No, Mommy, Daddy just teaches me to be obedient. He said if I tell anyone, it'll be worse for me." That's it. Now I was certain. Robert had threatened my daughter to keep her quiet. And Julia, with that attention deficit, with that innocence, didn't understand she could ask for help. The years went by, and Julia grew up somewhat damaged by life, you know? At 15, she could barely concentrate to study. She repeated 7th grade twice. Teachers always said she was intelligent, but lived in her own world, always scared. Of course she was scared. The poor girl was beaten every day at home. At 17, 18, Julia still seemed like a child. Because of ADHD and all those years of fear, she never managed to develop properly. She depended on me for everything. I chose her clothes, I combed her hair, I did her college assignments. Because Robert had gotten her a spot in an education program at a local college here in Marietta, but she could barely follow the classes. "Margaret," Robert would say, "if it weren't for me, this girl would be nothing in life. I'm the one who brings order to her head. You're too soft, too lenient. That's why I need to be firm." Firm. He called it being firm. But I knew that every night, my 19-year-old daughter was still beaten like a child, in the locked room, with something wooden that Robert hid I don't know where. And the worst part, I didn't have the courage to do anything. I was afraid of Robert, afraid of breaking up our family, afraid of not being able to support Julia and myself alone. It was cowardice on my part, I know. But fear paralyzes us in a way only those who've lived it understand. until the day came when I could no longer pretend not to see. The day I discovered exactly what my husband did to our daughter and how it was much worse than I imagined. My dear ones, the most difficult moment to tell has arrived. It was a Monday in March 2014. I remember exactly because it was my sister Dorothy's birthday, and I had spent the whole day making a pound cake to take to her house that weekend. Julia was 19, but seemed like a 12-year-old girl by the way she behaved, always clinging to me, always asking for help with anything. That day, something happened that I'll never forget. Robert came home from work earlier than usual, around 4 in the afternoon. He was visibly irritated, huffing, throwing things anywhere. "Margaret, where's Julia?" he asked, not even greeting me. "She's in her room studying," I replied. "Studying nothing! Her college professor called me at work today, humiliating me in front of the crew. Said Julia didn't turn in an assignment, that she's missing classes, that she doesn't pay attention to what the professor says. Made me furious." My heart already raced. When Robert got angry like that, things got worse for Julia, much worse. "Robert, calm down. You know she has difficulties because of her condition." "Condition nothing. The problem is, you spoil this girl too much. But today, she's going to learn what real respect means." He went to his room, our room, and I heard him rummaging through something in the closet. My blood froze. That's where he kept that instrument he used to beat Julia. I'd never seen exactly what it was, but knew it was hidden behind our clothes. Robert came out of the room with a face I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was coldness, cruelty that made me tremble from head to toe. He went straight to Julia's room. "Julia, get up and come here with me, now!" "But Dad, I was study." "Now, I said." The shout was so loud even the neighbors must have heard. Julia came out of the room crying, already knowing what was coming. Robert pushed her into her room and slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. What happened next was hell on earth, my dear ones. It was as if Robert had completely lost control. The sounds coming from inside were much more violent than usual. Whack! 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 But now they were stronger blows, more frequent, along with Julia's muffled screams. I was in the kitchen, washing the same dishes for the 5th time, trying to do something to keep from going crazy, hearing my daughter being beaten like that. But suddenly, I heard a scream that chilled my soul. "Dad, please, I can't take it anymore. Please, stop." It was Julia screaming loud for the first time. She always endured silently, but now she was begging. And Robert responded with a voice that didn't seem human. "Shut up! You're going to learn today what happens to those who disrespect me." Whack! 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 The blows became even more violent. I heard Julia cry desperately, sobbing. It was a cry of physical pain, of total despair. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the room door and started pounding. Robert, stop that. You're really going to hurt the girl. Get out of here, Margaret. This is none of your business. Robert, she's my daughter too. Open this door. You stay out there until I'm done." People, I never felt so small, so useless in my life. My daughter was being tortured on the other side of that door, and there I was, standing like a statue, not knowing what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what if Robert found out? What if he did worse to Julia? What if he hit me too? Fear paralyzed me completely. I stayed there, leaning against the hallway wall, crying softly and hearing my daughter suffer. After almost 2 hours, Robert finally opened the door. He came out sweating, panting, as if he'd done heavy work. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to the bathroom to shower. When I heard the shower turn on, I ran to Julia's room. My God, what I saw there destroyed me completely. Julia was lying face down on the bed, trembling, with her shirt torn on the back. Her legs were full of red marks, and she could barely move. "My daughter, my dear daughter." Julia couldn't even speak properly. She just cried and trembled. I picked her up. Even at 19, she was thin, weighed like a child, and took her to my room. I gave her a painkiller, put a damp cloth on the marks, and stayed there, stroking her hair until she fell asleep. That night, while Robert snored beside me as if nothing had happened, I stayed awake thinking about something terrible. What if one day he kills my daughter? What if in one of these beatings he goes too far and kills her? It was at that moment I made the most important decision of my life. It was March 2014, and cell phones with cameras were becoming common. I had just gotten a smartphone from my brother Thomas, one of those Samsung phones with a good camera. Back then, it was new to have a phone that recorded video. The next day, while Robert worked and Julia was at college, I kept thinking about her room. I looked at every corner, trying to imagine where I could hide my cell phone in a way that would film the bed without Robert noticing. The bookshelf. Julia had a bookshelf full of college textbooks right across from the bed. If I placed the phone between the books, with the lens pointed at the bed, maybe I could film what really happened in there. But I was afraid. What if Robert discovered? What if he saw the cell phone? What if he became even more violent? On the other hand, I needed proof. I needed to see with my own eyes what my husband did to our daughter. Because part of me still couldn't believe it was as bad as it seemed. Part of me still hoped it was just spankings, that my head was exaggerating. How wrong I was. How terribly, painfully wrong. The decision was made. At the next opportunity I had, I was going to discover the whole truth. And this truth would show me a monster I never imagined existed in my own home, sleeping in my own bed. My dear ones, after that terrible night in March, it took me another week to have the courage to put my plan into action. A whole week where I kept looking at my Samsung phone in the kitchen drawer, thinking, Margaret, you need to do this. It's the only way to know the truth and save your daughter. During that week, I observed Robert with completely different eyes. I saw how he acted normally during the day, greeting neighbors with that wide smile, talking about football with Mr. Peterson from next door, complaining about gas prices at the Shell station. And I wondered how that same man transformed into a monster every night. It was haunting to realize how he managed to maintain that perfect facade. I also observed how Robert interacted with other people during the day. When he met Mrs. Whitmore at the grocery store, he always asked about her grandchildren, complimented the pound cake she made to sell. With the work crew, I'd hear him talking on the phone politely, solving problems, being respectful. How can it be, I thought? How can this same man be so cruel to his own daughter? I watched my daughter with painful attention during those days. Julia barely looked me in the eyes during meals. When I tried to talk about college, about professors, about friends, she always responded with monosyllables. Okay, Mom. Yes, Mom. I don't know, Mom. It was as if she'd learned that the less she spoke, the less trouble she'd have. I noticed things that had previously gone unnoticed, like how Julia always sat sideways in chairs, never fully supporting her back, how she avoided wearing tight jeans, always preferring loose clothing, how she limped slightly in the first hours of morning but tried to disguise it when she noticed I was watching. I also noticed her silent rituals. Every morning when she woke up, Julia would stand still at the edge of the bed for a few minutes, as if mentally preparing to face another day. She always showered with the door locked, something she didn't do when she was younger. And especially, she never hummed while tidying her room anymore, like she did as a child. On the Wednesday of that observation week, something happened that confirmed I was on the right path. I was preparing lunch when I heard Julia crying softly in her room. I went there and asked what had happened. Nothing, Mommy. I was just studying about child development, and there was a chapter about children who suffer violence at home. It made me sad. Sad why, my daughter? Because it must be horrible to live in fear inside your own home, right? Having nowhere to run. Those words completely chilled me. She wasn't talking about the cases in the book. She was talking about her own life. On Thursday of the following week, Robert left for work, as always, at 6 in the morning. He had to go to a new construction site starting in the Kennesaw area, a large 2-story house for Dr. Peterson's family, who was a dentist here in Marietta, and always hired Robert for jobs because he trusted the quality of his work. Julia only had classes in the afternoon that day, from 2 to 6. It was the perfect opportunity. I had breakfast with her. We talked about college subjects. Julia was taking didactics and educational psychology that semester. "Mom, did you know there are several types of intelligence? It's not just being good at math or English," she said, animated for the first time in a long time. "Really, honey? Tell Mom." "There's emotional intelligence, bodily intelligence, musical intelligence." The professor said each child has a different way of learning. I looked at my girl talking about education with such care and thought, how does Robert not see our daughter's intelligence? How does he only see flaws in such a special girl? After Julia left for college at 1:30 in the afternoon, I stood for over half an hour in the living room, breathing deeply, gathering all the courage I needed. I picked up my rosary, said 3 Hail Marys, and asked for protection from Our Lady. "Blessed Mother, give me strength to discover the truth and protect my daughter. Thy will be done." My heart was racing when I finally grabbed my cell phone and went to her room. I stood for about 5 minutes at the door, looking inside that space that should be peaceful for a 19-year-old girl, but had become a place of torture. "My God, give me strength," I murmured, making the sign of the cross. "Help me discover the truth and protect my daughter." I entered the room and observed every detail with heightened attention. The bookshelf was right in front of the bed, in a perfect position to film everything. Julia had always been very studious, despite the difficulties ADHD brought. She had books about child education, didactics, learning psychology, cognitive development. They were thick, heavy books she bought, used at the book fair that happened every month at the town square. I chose 2 very thick volumes, Early Childhood Education and Cognitive Development in Children, and created a perfect little space between them. I tested the angle several times, positioning and repositioning the phone until I was absolutely certain the lens was pointing exactly at the bed. I set the phone to record video at the highest quality possible, checked if there was enough battery, it was charged 100%, put it on silent mode so it wouldn't make any noise when it started recording, and even tested for a minute to see if the audio captured the room sounds well. I still remember exactly the thought that went through my head at that moment. "Margaret, after this recording, your life will never be the same. If what you suspect is true, you'll have to make very difficult decisions. If not, at least you'll have peace of mind." Either way, I couldn't stand living in that terrible uncertainty anymore. "Done," I thought, after positioning everything perfectly and starting the recording. "Tonight, I'll discover what really happens in here. May God give me strength to handle what I'm going to see." I left the room and left everything exactly as it was before. I tidied the house, ironed clothes, prepared lunch ingredients. But everything I did was on autopilot. My head couldn't stop thinking about the phone there, recording the silence of the room, waiting for night to come. The day passed slowly, like an eternity. Every time I looked at the kitchen clock, it seemed time had stopped. I prepared lunch with all care: navy beans well seasoned with herbs from the garden, salt-cured ham properly soaked, boiled potatoes with a clove of garlic, and banana pudding that Robert always said was the best in Marietta, trying to act natural but with nerves on edge. During lunch, I observed Robert eating and talking normally. He was worried about the schedule for the new construction, explaining that Dr. Peterson wanted everything done in 4 months to have a birthday party for his wife in the new house. "Margaret, you can't imagine the size of this house. It'll have 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a pool. It's really big money." I listened to him talking about work, about money, about plans for the coming months, and thought, is this man here planning the future, the same one who tortures our daughter every night? The dissociation was so perfect, it was frightening. Julia came back from college at 6:30 in the afternoon, carrying a folder full of photocopies and notes. She always tried to study hard, poor thing, even with all the concentration difficulties she faced. She told me she'd had an interesting class about literacy methods, that the professor had shown different techniques to teach children with special needs. "Mom, the professor said each child has their own pace, their own way of learning. That we can't force them all to be the same," Julia said, putting books in her backpack. "That's true, honey. Each person is unique, has their qualities," I replied, thinking about how Robert never managed to understand that. I watched her from afar, seeing how she behaved in her own room. It was sad to notice how she avoided staying in bed too long, always preferring to study in the small chair near the window. When she needed to get something from the headboard, she did it quickly and left right away. Now I understood why. That bed had become a place of suffering for her. Robert arrived from work at 5:30, as always, with clothes dirty from cement and red dust. He'd spent the day supervising the beginning of the foundation for the new house, instructing the laborers on how to prepare concrete properly. He was tired, complaining about the March heat that already announced the coming summer. He took a long shower, humming a country song that played a lot on the radio at that time. He put on blue shorts and a clean white t-shirt, and came to dinner as if it were just another completely normal day in our family. During dinner, he was even in good spirits, telling stories about problems with construction suppliers. "Margaret, can you believe the sand guy wants to push substandard material on me?" I told him, "Mr. Wilson, do you think I'm an idiot? That sand won't even work for a sandbox. If Dr. Peterson sees a badly plastered wall, he'll never hire me again." I laughed at his stories, participated in the conversation, asked about the other workers, but inside I was terribly nervous. I thought, in a little while this same man who's here telling jokes is going to transform into a monster, and this time I'll have proof of everything. After dinner, around 8 o'clock, came the usual routine. Robert got up from the table, pushed his chair back, went to the backyard to light his Marlboro cigarette. He stayed there about 10 minutes, looking at the starry sky, taking slow drags, as if mentally preparing for what was coming. When he came back inside the house, that's when he said those words I already knew by heart, but this time made me freeze to my bones. "Margaret, I'm going to talk to the girl." "Okay, Robert." This time, I managed to completely disguise my anxiety. I stayed at the table, finishing my coffee as if it were just another normal night. But internally, it was as if there was a drum beating in my chest. I stayed in the kitchen organizing pans, but with all my senses alert to every sound coming from the hallway. I heard Robert enter our room first. He always went there to get that damned instrument he kept hidden. Then I heard his heavy footsteps through the house's wooden hallway, which always creaked on that loose board near the bathroom. Julia's room door opened with that characteristic squeak of the hinge that needed oil, and finally the dry sound of the key turning in the lock. People, I was never so nervous, and at the same time so determined in my life. My hands trembled washing the same plates for the 4th time, but my mind was focused on one thing. The phone is recording. I'll finally know the whole truth. No matter how terrible it is, I need to see with my own eyes. The terrible routine began as always. First, about 15 minutes of almost total silence. Robert must have been giving his usual instructions to Julia, preparing her for what was coming. I could only hear a low murmur of his voice, but couldn't understand the words. It was always like this. He spoke low, she responded with monosyllables, and then the torture began. Then the sounds I already knew so well started, but this time had a completely different meaning. Whack, whack, whack. With each blow I heard, I thought, it's being recorded. It's being recorded. Finally, there will be proof. Instead of just feeling despair, I also felt a strength growing inside me, a determination I'd never experienced before. Hold on, Margaret, I thought, drying the same plates over and over. Your daughter will be free after tonight. This man will pay for everything he did. An hour and 15 minutes later, I mentally timed every minute of that torture. Robert finally came out of Julia's room. He came to the kitchen walking slowly, as he always did after these sessions. He washed his hands in the sink with that bar soap on the windowsill, dried them with the dish towel, and said with the utmost naturalness in the world, "The girl is learning properly. Today she was well behaved, didn't give any trouble. I think she's finally understanding things." "That's good, Robert," I replied, feigning interest while my stomach turned with disgust. How could he talk like that, as if torturing a 19-year-old daughter was completely normal? Robert went to our room to watch TV, some crime show that always aired at 9. I heard him turn on the television, find the channel, and start laughing at the show's segments. It was surreal. The same man who had just tortured our daughter was there, relaxed, enjoying television. I waited another half hour, hearing him laugh at the show, until I was absolutely certain he was completely distracted. Then, with my heart in my throat and shaky legs, I went to Julia's room. I knocked lightly on the door. "Julia, my love, can I come in?" "You can, Mommy," came her weak voice, muffled by the pillow. I entered and found her lying on her side in bed, still dressed, but clearly hurt. She tried to sit when she saw me, but grimaced in pain and lay back down. "How are you, honey?" "I'm fine, Mommy. Just a little tired from college today." Lie. She wasn't fine at all. But after so many years living that horrible situation, Julia had learned perfectly how to hide pain, to lie to protect me too. I stayed there chatting a few minutes with her about the day's classes, about the coming week's assignments, until I was sure Robert wouldn't come investigate what we were talking about. Then, with extreme care, I approached the bookshelf and got my cell phone back, disguising it as if I were just moving books to arrange them. My God, I thought, looking at that little device that now held definitive proof of what happened in my house every night. Now I'll know the whole truth, however terrible it may be. I went back to the kitchen, told Robert I was going to finish cleaning up from dinner and organize pans for the next morning's breakfast. I locked the kitchen door from inside, something I never did, but I needed total privacy to watch that video. With hands trembling so much I almost dropped the phone on the floor, I opened the video file. The screen loaded for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, and then it started playing the footage that would change my life forever. My dear ones, what I saw in those 43 minutes of recording destroyed me completely. Destroyed me in a way I never imagined possible. Never, not in my worst nightmares, did I imagine so much cruelty, so much coldness, so much pure evil was possible inside my own home. The video showed Robert entering the room with a piece of wood in his hand. It wasn't a thin rod. It was a thick board, about the width of a broom handle, but rectangular, sanded, that he must have gotten from some construction site and prepared especially for this. It was a torture instrument custom made. Robert ordered Julia to lie face down on the bed and take off her shirt. And then, with the coldness of a butcher, with a calmness that chilled me to the soul, he began to hit my daughter's back and legs. They weren't educational spankings. They were violent blows, calculated, methodically distributed across her body as if it were a job he had to complete. And the worst part, while he hit, he talked. He didn't yell, didn't get agitated, didn't show anger. He spoke low, with a frightening calmness, as if giving a lesson. "This is for you to learn what real discipline is. Whack! This is to take the laziness out of your body. Whack! Your mother is too soft with you. That's why I have to do the job right. Whack! If you don't learn now, you'll become lost like other girls your age. Whack! Julia cried softly, trying to muffle her moans of pain in the pillow, writhing with each blow. And Robert continued, systematically, hitting every part of her body that wouldn't show when she wore clothes. When she tried to move to escape the pain, he held her by the hair with one hand and continued hitting with the other. Stay still. If you move, it'll be worse, much worse. People, I was watching my own husband torture my daughter with the coldness of a professional executioner. It wasn't loss of control. It wasn't momentary anger. It was pure sadism, planned, executed with terrible precision. Robert felt pleasure in causing pain, in having total control over another person. The video lasted 43 full minutes. 43 minutes of systematic, cruel, inhuman torture. At the end, Robert put away the damned wood behind Julia's own closet. That's where he kept the instrument hidden, not in our room as I thought, and left calmly, leaving my daughter thrown on the bed, trembling with pain and terror. When the video ended, I ran to the bathroom and vomited. I threw up everything in my stomach, and then continued dry heaving from so much disgust. My body completely rejected that horrible reality. I sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried like I'd never cried in my life. But along with the crying and disgust came something I hadn't felt in years. Courage, a furious courage, determined, relentless. It wasn't just sadness I was feeling. It was anger. A righteous anger of someone who finally understood they had to act, whatever the cost. I went back to the kitchen, grabbed my cell phone with hands still trembling, entered the file menu, and sent that video to the cloud, to Google Drive that my brother Thomas had taught me to use a few months earlier. Then I saved a copy to my email and even sent it to myself on WhatsApp. If Robert discovered and broke my phone, the video would still be safe in 3 different places. The next morning, Friday, Robert left early as always, at 6 o'clock sharp, to get to the construction site before the other workers. As soon as I heard him turn the corner with that characteristic sound of his truck, I grabbed the house phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "Hello, police? I need to report a very serious crime. My husband has been torturing our daughter for years, and I have filmed proof." The operator immediately connected me to the detective on duty. I explained the situation in full detail, and he said in a serious voice, "Ma'am, can you come to the station today? Bring the footage and your daughter's ID. We'll arrange for immediate arrest." "Yes, I can. I'll be there right away." I woke Julia, who was sleeping deeply because of the medicine I'd given her the night before. I quickly explained what had happened, that I'd filmed everything, that we were finally going to be free. At first, she was desperate. "Mommy, what if Dad finds out? What if he gets even angrier? What if he does worse to me?" "My dear daughter, there won't be any more anger. Today your father will be arrested for torture. This is over. Over forever, my love." Around 10 in the morning, Julia and I were at the Marietta Police Department in a small room with air conditioning that didn't work quite right. I showed the complete video to Detective James Richardson, a man about 50 years old, serious, who was visibly shocked and outraged by what he saw. "Ma'am," he said after watching about 10 minutes, "I don't need to see anything more. This is a very serious case of assault and qualified torture. We're going to issue a warrant for preventive detention immediately. This man is a danger to society." 2 hours later, while Robert was having coffee at the construction site where he worked, surrounded by fellow workers and helpers, 3 police cars arrived with sirens on. 6 officers got out, and Detective Richardson personally made the arrest. "Robert Davenport? You're under arrest for aggravated assault and torture of a minor." Robert tried to resist, shouted that it was all lies, that I was crazy, that I'd set a trap for him. But when the officers showed they had the video as irrefutable proof of the crime, he went completely silent, turned white as paper. The entire neighborhood, the construction workers, everyone saw Robert leaving in handcuffs, being placed in the back of the patrol car like a common criminal. Everyone talked about it for weeks. Who would have thought Robert, so hardworking, so respected, was such a monster inside his home? And so, that Friday in March 2014, after nearly 20 years of silent suffering, my daughter was finally free. We were free. And Robert, for the first time in his life, was going to answer for the cruel acts he committed against our family. My dear ones, today, 11 years after that Friday that changed our lives forever, I can say we're living in peace. True peace. I'm 52 years old, my Julia is 30 now, and our life here in Marietta is simple, but full of joy. Robert was sentenced to 12 years in prison for torture and aggravated assault. He served 8 years at a Georgia state prison and was released in 2022. When we learned he'd been released, Julia and I were nervous, but he never showed up here again. We heard through others that he moved to another state, far from Georgia. And may he be happy far from us. Today I live in the same house in the Kennesaw subdivision where everything happened, but I transformed it completely. I painted it light yellow, a cheerful color that brought new life to the walls. I moved all the furniture around, especially in Julia's room. Where her bed used to be, there's now a beautiful study desk I bought when she went back to school. Because my Julia, my dear ones, managed to graduate. Yes, she completed her education degree in 2018, 4 years after her father's arrest. It was difficult because the trauma had greatly affected her concentration, but with psychological counseling and lots of love, she succeeded. Today she works as a teacher's aide at a preschool here in downtown Marietta. The pay is modest, but she loves what she does. Seeing Julia working with children is an emotion I can't explain. She has patience, special care with little ones who've been through difficulties. It's as if the pain she lived through became a strength to help other children. The school principal always praises her work. Julia still lives with me, and that's okay. Because of ADHD and everything she went through, she prefers the security of having her mother nearby. She's dated some young men, but nothing serious yet. She says she's focused on healing completely before building a family, and I respect her timeline. As for me, I continue making my homemade breads, which became famous in the neighborhood. Every Friday, I make a batch of cornbread that I sell to neighbors. The money helps with the budget and mainly gives me a good feeling of independence. I never want to be completely dependent on any man again. On free afternoons, I embroider tablecloths that I sell at the Saturday farmers market. It's delicate work that calms my mind and still earns some money. I learned to value these moments of peace, these simple things I couldn't properly enjoy before. My routine today is blessed with tranquility. I wake up early, make coffee for Julia and me. She goes to work. I take care of the house and my tasks. At night, we watch television together, talk about our day, about plans. These are conversations we never had before because fear always hung over our house. Julia was in therapy for 4.5 years. It was fundamental for her to understand that nothing she suffered was her fault. The therapist explained that victims of domestic violence always carry guilt that isn't theirs. Seeing my daughter free herself from that guilt too was one of the greatest joys of my life. Today, when I look back, I feel immense gratitude for having had courage that day in March. If I hadn't filmed, if I hadn't reported, Julia would still be suffering. Or worse, Robert could have killed her in one of those violent beatings. I learned that we can never accept violence as normal. No matter how difficult it is to report, no matter how much fear we have, it's always better than continuing to live in hell. Our dignity is worth more than any financial or social comfort. My relationship with Julia today is one of total complicity. We're mother and daughter, but also friends, companions in struggle. She invites me to watch movies on the couch, tells me about her students, asks my advice about clothes. These are simple gestures that didn't exist before because fear dominated our house. Financially, we live simply, but without need. Julia earns her teacher's aide salary, I have my breads and embroidery, and I still receive a small pension that the state pays me as compensation for what we went through. It's not much, but it's enough for two women who learned to value truly important things in life. And the important things, we discovered, aren't material possessions. They're the peace of sleeping calmly, the joy of waking without fear, the freedom to talk loudly inside the house, to laugh, to cry when needed, to simply be who we are. My dear ones, if you or someone you know is going through a situation similar to what I lived through, I want to say something very important. You're not alone. And especially, It's not your fault. For years, I blamed myself for not noticing earlier, for not acting sooner, for letting my daughter suffer so long. But I learned that fear paralyzes us in a way only those who live it understand. What's important isn't when you discover. What's important is that you discover and act. When I saw that terrible video, I understood I had to choose. Either I continued pretending not to see, or I saved my daughter. I chose to save my daughter, and it was the best decision of my life. Because today, 11 years later, I can look in the mirror and know I was the mother my Julia needed me to be. If you're experiencing violence at home, know that help exists. In any country in the world, there are authorities ready to protect you. In the United States, you can call 911 or seek help at your local police department. Look for local domestic violence resources and organizations that can help. I learned that violence is never normal, never education, never love. Love protects, doesn't hurt. Love cares, doesn't threaten. If someone hits you, humiliates you, threatens you, that's not love. It's violence, and violence is a crime everywhere. My life taught me we're stronger than we imagine. I, a simple housewife from Marietta, managed to confront a violent man and protect my daughter. If I could do it, anyone can. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and acting anyway. Today, when I see Julia working with children, being affectionate, being free, I know all the pain was worth it. Because breaking the cycle of violence isn't just saving one person, it's saving future generations. My Julia will never raise a child in fear because she knows the difference between discipline and torture. For the mothers listening to me, observe your children. If they're always scared, always hurt, always sad, investigate. Sometimes violence is closer to us than we imagine. And remember, protecting our children is our greatest responsibility as mothers. And for you who made it this far, who heard this whole painful story, I have a special request. My dear warriors who had the courage and determination to watch this grandmother from Marietta's complete story. You who understood the importance of reporting domestic violence, help me spread this message of hope. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales now and turn on notifications, because each subscription helps this story reach more people who need courage to act. Leave a comment below writing just courage. That way, I'll know you watched to the end and understood the message. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Your action could save a life. Life is too precious to be wasted in fear. Choose freedom, choose peace, choose dignity, always. On my wedding night, my own father broke down the cabin door and screamed, "You're mine. No one touches what's mine." He grabbed me by the hair to drag me away. But what my husband did that night saved my life and destroyed the monster who raised me. Hi, my dear ones. Hi, my sweethearts. It's so good to have you here with me today. Sit down, make yourselves comfortable, because Grandma is going to tell you a story I've carried in my heart for many years. My name is Clara Mae Henderson. I'm 76 years old, and I was born and still live here in Millbrook, Tennessee. This is my land, you know, where the cold north wind blows hard in winter and where the smell of wood smoke fills the streets when the real cold comes. These days, my days are pretty peaceful, thank God. Every morning, bright and early, I wake up to the singing of birds that nest in the old apple tree in my backyard. I brew my coffee strong and black, the way I learned from my mother when I was a girl, and sit on the wooden porch of my little house. It's a simple house, but it's mine, you understand? One with a lot of sweat and tears, but mine. Before I continue, my loves, I need to ask you for a little something. If you're enjoying our conversation, click that like button down below and subscribe to the channel, okay? Turn on the notification bell too, because every week I come here to talk with you, tell stories, share a piece of my life. You have no idea how good it makes me feel to know there are people on the other side listening to me, keeping me company. And you, my dear ones, who are watching me now, Tell me here in the comments. What little town are you watching from, and what time of day did you find this video? In the morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of love. Now, taking a deep breath, I need to talk about something I've carried with me since I was a young woman. A story that few know, but that shaped who I am today. It's about the most terrifying and at the same time most liberating night of my life. About a father who imprisoned me in a way that no one saw, and about a man who became my salvation when I needed it most. This story begins way back when I was still a child playing barefoot on the dirt roads of this same Millbrook. My childhood here in Millbrook began in a large wooden house in what they now call the Oak Hill District, but back then it was almost rural. The house sat on a huge lot, had a tall black iron gate, and my father, Frederick James Henderson, insisted on keeping that gate always locked. He said it was to protect us, that the world out there was too dangerous for his family. My father was a man of means. He owned land, raised cattle, sold timber from the oak and pine forests. Back then you still could, you know? He was respected in town, always wore a suit, a wide-brimmed hat, and had a black Ford that was the envy of everyone. People greeted him on the street with respect, some even with fear. He had a strong presence, you know? The kind where when he entered a room, everyone went quiet. My mother, Dorothy Ann, was a petite woman with brown hair always pulled back in a tight bun. She took care of the house, cooked, embroidered, but was far too quiet. Today, looking back, I see that she lived on tiptoes, as if afraid to make noise. She taught me things in whispers: how to make biscuits, how to wash clothes, how to tend the chickens in the yard, but always looking at the door, always attentive to my father's footsteps. I had a brother, Robert, 3 years older than me. He was like my father, strong, a man of few words, and from early on, my father took him into the business, teaching him to be a real man, as he said. Robert protected me when he could, but as he grew older, he became more and more like my father, and that protection disappeared. Our routine was very set. I woke up with the rooster's crow, helped my mother make breakfast, homemade biscuits, butter, fig preserves, fresh cheese. My father sat at the head of the table, and we ate in silence, only speaking if he asked something. After breakfast, I had to study. My father hired a private teacher, Miss Hilda, because he didn't want me going to school with just anyone, as he put it. I liked Miss Hilda. She was sweet, patient, taught me to read, write, do arithmetic. But the lessons were right there in the house, in the little room my father called the library. I'd look through the windows at other children passing by on the street, laughing, playing, and I'd want to be out there with them. When I finished my lessons, I could play in the yard, but only in the yard, never on the street. My father said that a family girl didn't hang around on the street like riffraff. I played alone most of the time, made little houses with stones and sticks, talked to the chickens, climbed the apple tree in the back. Sometimes Teresa, daughter of our housekeeper, Mrs. Ella, would play with me. She was my age, had short curly hair, and we'd make up games, house, school, pretend tea parties. But I noticed my father didn't like it when Teresa came over. He'd look through the window with a closed expression, and then call Mrs. Ella to give her some errands, and the girl would leave. I'd be upset, but I didn't say anything. We learned early not to contradict my father. When I turned about 8 or 9 years old, I started to notice some strange things. My father began paying more attention to me. It wasn't that normal father attention, you know? It was different. He'd ask where I'd been, even though I'd only been in the yard. He'd ask who I'd talked to, even though I barely talked to anyone. If Miss Hilda complimented me because I'd done well on a lesson, he'd be all proud, but in a way that gave me a tightness in my chest. There was one thing that bothered me a lot. My father wouldn't let me cut my hair. My hair was long, very dark, reached almost to my waist, and he said it was my princess crown. My mother would braid my hair every day, very tight, and my father insisted on watching. He'd run his hand through my braids and say, "That's my girl, my pretty girl." And that, even though I was a child, left me with a chill in my stomach. At family gatherings, Grandma Gertrude's birthday, Christmas, Easter, my father would put me in a pretty dress, make me stay by his side the whole time. If any cousin or uncle came to talk to me, he'd quickly change the subject and pull me away. I was like his decoration, you know? He'd show me off to everyone, but wouldn't let anyone get too close. I didn't really understand what was happening, but there was something heavy in the air of that house. My mother lived tense. My brother didn't play with me anymore, and I felt more and more alone, even though I was surrounded by people. In winter, when the cold pressed in and frost covered the yard in white, I'd sit near the wood stove and stare at the flames. I dreamed of being like that fire, free to dance, to illuminate, to go wherever I wanted. But I was trapped in that big cold house, with that iron gate always locked, and with a father who looked at me in a way that, even as a child, I already knew wasn't right. As I grew older, that look got heavier, and the gate higher, and the world outside increasingly distant. When I turned 13, my body began to change, and with it, my father's behavior also changed. He became more vigilant, more present, more suffocating. I remember my 13th birthday as if it were yesterday. My mother had made a pound cake, my favorite, with cream cheese frosting. She lit 13 candles and sang happy birthday softly because my father didn't like noise. When I went to blow out the candles, my father held my hand and said, looking into my eyes in a way that chilled me, "Now you're not a child anymore, Clara. Now you need to be even more careful. The world out there is full of men who want to take advantage of pretty young ladies. But you're my daughter. I'll protect you." Always. The word always echoed in my head for days. It sounded more like a sentence than a promise. Around that time, my father started taking me along to some appointments, meetings with cattle buyers, dinners with businessmen, Sunday church. He insisted I stay by his side, always in a nice dress, hair down or with a satin ribbon. "This is my daughter, Clara, the jewel of my house," he'd introduce me to everyone. And he'd hold my hand, or place his hand on my back, or fix my hair. Always touching me, always marking me as his property. I started to feel the boys' stares, at church, in the town square when my father took me to buy fabric, at the general store. But as soon as a boy looked in my direction, my father would get closer, pull me by the arm, and cast a look that made the boy quickly look away. Once, a boy my age, the pharmacist's son, came to talk to me after church. He asked my name, said he thought I was pretty. My father appeared out of nowhere, put his hand on the boy's shoulder with such force that I saw him grimace in pain, and said very quietly, but with a voice that cut, "This girl isn't for you. Forget she exists." The boy left immediately, and I felt my face burn with shame. When I was 15, some young men started showing interest in courting me. Small-town stuff, you know? Families knew each other, and parents talked about marriages for their children. Appeared Eddie's son of a rancher friend of my father's. Handsome boy, polite, who had just returned from Nashville where he was studying. He came to dinner at our house with his father. During dinner, he tried to talk to me, asked me some questions about what I liked to do. I answered shyly, happy to finally have someone paying attention to me. After they left, my father called me into the living room. He was standing with his back to me, looking out the window. When he turned around, he had an expression on his face I'd never seen before. A mixture of anger and something else, something that scared me. "You're not going to marry that boy, Clara," he said, his voice low but firm. "But father, I didn't even—" I tried to speak. "I said no!" he shouted, and I jumped in fright. "You think I didn't see? I saw how you smiled at him, how you answered his questions, all animated. You want to abandon me? After everything I've done for you?" Tears ran down my face. "No, Father, I don't want to abandon anyone. He approached, held my face with both hands, squeezing my cheeks. "You're my daughter. Mine. No man in this world will be good enough for you. None. Understand?" I nodded, trembling. He released me and left the room. I stood there crying silently, tasting blood in my mouth where he'd pressed too hard. After that day, 3 more young men appeared over the following months. They all left after talking with my father. I never knew what he told them, but they came out pale, fear in their eyes, and never looked in my direction again. I felt like a prisoner. The house had become my cell, my father, my jailer, and there was no way to escape, because where would I go? I had no money, didn't know the world outside, had no one who could help me. My mother lived in her own world, quiet, accepting everything. My brother Robert had left home, went to work in Memphis, and barely came back. It was when I was 17 that I met Michael. He appeared one March afternoon in 1966. My father had hired him to do some carpentry work on the property, fix fences, renovate the barn, build some new furniture. Michael was from Knoxville, had come to Millbrook looking for work. He was tall, broad-shouldered, large, calloused hands of someone who worked hard. But what caught my attention most were his eyes. Dark eyes, deep, that seemed to hold stories he never told. He was a man of few words. He'd arrive early, work all day almost in silence, and leave at the end of the afternoon. But I noticed that, from time to time, he'd look at me. It wasn't a bold look, no, it was different. It was a look of someone who understood, you know, as if he saw that I was trapped there and felt sorry. One day, I was in the yard hanging clothes on the line. My mother had stayed in bed with a headache, and Michael was fixing the back fence. I felt him watching me. I turned my head, and our eyes met. He didn't look away. Neither did I. We stayed like that for a few seconds that seemed eternal. My heart beat so hard, I thought he'd hear it from where he was. He went back to his work, but that night I couldn't sleep. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. In the following days, we started exchanging glances. Small, quick ones, always being careful so my father wouldn't see. Once, when he passed by me carrying a board, he said very quietly, almost in a whisper, "You deserve to be free." And he kept walking as if nothing had happened. Those words moved me in a way I can't explain. Someone had seen my prison. Someone understood. We started communicating in secret. He'd leave little notes hidden under a rock in the back of the yard, near the apple tree. I'd respond and leave them in the same place. They were simple notes, short but loaded with meaning. "Are you okay today? I thought of you. Don't give up." My father suspected nothing. To him, Michael was just another employee, a quiet man who did his work and left. But to me, Michael was becoming the only light in the darkness I lived in. One day, in a note, he wrote, "I can get you out of here, if you want." I held that paper with trembling hands. I cried. For the first time in years, I cried with relief. Someone was offering me a way out. Someone was willing to save me. I wrote back, "Yes, please." And that's how our escape plan disguised as marriage began. But we didn't yet imagine what my father would be capable of when he found out. The following months were the hardest of my life until then. Michael and I continued exchanging notes under that rock, but we had to be extremely careful. My father had finished hiring him for the jobs, but Michael found a way to stay nearby. He got work at a sawmill near Millbrook, and sometimes, on Sunday mornings very early, when my father went to the field to check on the cattle, we'd meet quickly. There was an abandoned chapel on the old road to Bristol, hidden among the pine trees. That's where we'd see each other. I'd make up excuses, tell my mother I was going to Miss Hilda's house to get some books, or that I was going to the corner store to buy thread for embroidery. My mother, poor thing, never suspected. Or if she did, she pretended not to see, perhaps afraid of what my father would do if he knew she'd let me go out. In those meetings, Michael told me about his life. He'd grown up alone. His parents had died when he was young, raised by an uncle who beat him for anything. He'd learned to defend himself early, not to trust anyone, to keep everything inside. But with me, he opened up. He told me he'd never felt anything like what he felt for me, that he'd protect me from anything, that we'd manage to get out of there together. I believed him. I had to believe. He was my only hope. But as the months passed, my father began to notice I was different. I couldn't hide the small light of hope that had been born inside me. He noticed, and he didn't like it at all. One night, in September 1966, my father called me into his study. He was sitting behind the solid wood desk, fingers interlaced, looking at me with that look I'd learned to fear. "Sit down, Clara," he said, pointing to the chair in front of the desk. I sat, hands sweaty, heart racing. "You've been different," he began, his voice too calm, which was always a bad sign. "Smiling more, distracted, as if you were thinking about something, or someone." "No, Father, I tried to speak." He raised his hand, silencing me. "I'm not stupid, Clara. I know when someone's hiding something from me. And you, my daughter, are hiding something." The silence in the room was so heavy I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. He stood up, walked around the desk, stood next to me. He put his hand on my shoulder, squeezing. "You don't need anyone, understand? You have everything here. You have this house, you have food, you have good clothes, you have your father who takes care of you. What man in this world could give you more than I give you?" His hand squeezed harder, and I held back the urge to cry. "None, Father," I whispered. "Exactly, none. So you stop this nonsense of dreaming about Prince Charming. That doesn't exist. What exists is me, taking care of you, protecting you, always." He released me and went back behind the desk. "You can go." I left there, trembling, but more determined than ever. I needed to get out of that house. I needed Michael. The next day, I left a note for him under the rock. "My father is getting suspicious. We need to hurry everything." Michael responded the same day. "I'll figure something out. Trust me." And he figured it out. He discovered that if we went to Bristol, a neighboring town where no one knew us well, we could get married at the courthouse without needing my father's authorization. I was of age, had just turned 18 in October 1966. Legally, I could marry on my own. We planned everything in secret. On January 15, 1967, a Monday with strong sun and blue sky, I told my mother I was going to Miss Hilda's house to spend the afternoon helping her organize some books. My mother nodded without looking into my eyes. To this day, I wonder if she knew, if she'd guessed my plan and let me go because, deep down, she wanted me to be free. I left the house with a small bundle hidden under my shawl. I had a change of clothes, my birth certificate that I'd stolen from my father's study drawer, and a photo of my mother. Just that. I left everything behind. Michael was waiting for me on the old road, near the little chapel, with a truck borrowed from a friend. We went straight to Bristol. At the courthouse, we signed the papers with trembling hands. I became Clara May Henderson Miller, wife of Michael James Miller. The clerk, a gentleman with a gray mustache, looked at us and said, "You running away from something?" Michael answered, his voice firm, "Yes, but now we're running away together." The man nodded and stamped the papers. "Then get going, and good luck." We left there married, but we knew the worst was yet to come. My father would find out. And when he did, he wouldn't accept it. Michael had rented a cabin in the mountains near Gatlinburg, in an isolated place, surrounded by pine trees and thick forest. He said we needed to stay hidden for a few days until things calmed down, until we could plan where we'd live, how we'd start over. We arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. It was a simple wooden structure with a fireplace, a double bed, a small kitchen, and a porch with a view of the endless green of the mountains. It seemed like a dream. Finally, I was free. But that night, when I lay in bed next to Michael, I felt a tightness in my chest. A bad feeling, as if something was about to happen. Michael held my hand and said, "It's all okay now. You're safe with me." I wanted to believe, but deep down, I knew my father wouldn't let it go. He'd said so many times, "You're mine, always." And men like him didn't accept losing what they considered theirs. I didn't know that that same night, while the north wind whistled outside and the rain began to fall heavily on the roof, my father was already coming after me. He'd found out where I was, and he was coming to take me back. The storm started around 9 at night. The wind shook the cabin windows with a force that seemed to want to tear everything apart. The rain beat on the wooden roof like 1,000 fingers drumming endlessly, and the thunder exploded outside, making the entire structure shake to its foundations. The smell of wet earth entered through the window cracks, mixed with the aroma of smoke from the fireplace that Michael had lit to warm the place. He hugged me tight, saying everything was okay, that we were safe there, protected by the thick forest and the isolation of those mountains. I tried to believe. I wanted so badly to believe. We had soup for dinner that he'd prepared, made with potatoes, carrots, and pieces of sausage he'd bought on the road. The heat of the soup going down my throat brought me momentary comfort. We talked about the future, where we'd live, what kind of life we'd build together. He talked about going to the countryside, buying a little piece of land, raising some animals, planting a garden, having children. 3, at least, he said, smiling in a way that lit up his face. I smiled back, imagining that simple, free life I'd always dreamed of. A life where no one would tell me I was someone's property. Around 11 at night, we lay down. I was exhausted. It had been a long day, full of emotions that had drained me completely. The fear of the escape, the adrenaline of the secret marriage, the hope of a new life, the trip to the cabin. Everything had left me exhausted, as if every drop of energy had been wrung from my body. Michael hugged me from behind, his warm body against mine, his arm heavy and protective over my waist. I felt for the first time in my life what it was to feel truly protected, not imprisoned. It was different. It was like breathing fresh air after years of breathing ashes. It was good. It was peace. I was almost falling asleep, already in that zone between being awake and sleeping, when I heard a different noise outside. A creaking of wood, maybe, or the sound of an engine muffled by the rain. I thought it was a branch falling because of the wind, so I didn't worry. I closed my eyes again, letting the sound of the rain lull me. The noise of the storm was so loud, so constant, that it muffled any other sound. It was as if the world outside had disappeared, and only that cabin existed, that bed, that wool blanket that smelled of mothballs, me and Michael. But then, in an instant that was engraved in my memory like hot iron marking flesh, the bedroom door was broken down. The crash was so loud that for a second I thought it had been lightning striking the house, wood shattering into pieces, hinges breaking with a horrible metallic snap, screws flying. I jumped in bed, my heart racing so fast it felt like it would come out of my mouth, not understanding what was happening, my mind still caught between sleep and waking. Michael was already getting up, in a quick, instinctive movement, positioning his body in front of mine like a human shield. And then I saw him, my father. He was standing in the frame of the destroyed door, drenched by the rain, the black suit he so valued stuck to his body like a second skin, his gray hair always so neatly combed now disheveled, dripping dirty water on the wooden floor, his face red with anger or exertion, or both, and his eyes. My God, his eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They weren't human eyes. They were the eyes of something that had completely lost its reason, completely lost its humanity. Something wild, wounded, dangerous, like a cornered animal that decides to attack. He didn't look at Michael, not once. It was as if my husband didn't even exist there, as if he were invisible, irrelevant. He looked straight at me, and in that look I saw everything. The obsession he'd harbored for years, the rage of having been contradicted, the madness that had been hidden behind that mask of respectable father he wore in town. "Clara," he said, his voice low but cutting like broken glass tearing skin. "Get out of that bed. Now." I couldn't move. My body had turned to stone. I was paralyzed with fear, the same fear I felt when I was a child and heard him climbing the stairs at night. Michael took a step forward, placing himself between me and my father, his broad shoulders blocking my view. "You don't have the right to be here," Michael said, his voice calm but firm, each word measured. "She's my wife now. We're legally married. There are signed papers, recognized by the courthouse." My father laughed. It was a horrible laugh, hoarse, without any trace of joy, only bitterness and contempt. "Wife? You think a paper changes anything? A paper is just paper. She's my daughter. Mine. I raised her. I fed her. I took care of her all these years. No paper will change that. No man will take her from me." He advanced into the room with heavy steps, and then everything happened too fast and too slow at the same time. My father went right past Michael, or tried to pass, pushing him with his shoulder, and came straight to the bed like an enraged bull. He leaned over me and grabbed my long hair with both hands, wrapping the strands around his fingers, with such force that I felt my scalp burn with pain, as if it were on fire. I screamed. A scream that came from the depths of my soul, a scream of pure, primitive terror that I didn't even know existed inside me. "You're not going to give yourself to him," my father shouted, pulling my hair mercilessly, dragging me toward the edge of the bed, my body sliding over the sheets. "You're mine! No one touches what's mine! No one! You're going to come back home and forget this man exists!" I grabbed onto the sheets with absolute desperation, my nails digging into the fabric so hard I heard threads breaking, my whole body resisting, my legs kicking the air, trying to find support, but he was much stronger. He was pulling me, dragging me like I was a rag doll, and I felt like I was being torn apart inside. It wasn't just the physical pain of my hair being pulled out, whole locks coming out from the roots. It was the pain of seeing that he would never leave me in peace. Never. Even married, even an adult, even having fled to a place where no one knew who we were. He had found me, had come to get me, and he was going to take me back. He was going to lock me in that house again, in that room, behind that iron gate. And this time, I knew deep in my soul there would be no more escape. He would watch me day and night. He would kill me with living. "Father, please!" I screamed, crying, begging, my voice coming out strangled. "Let me go! Let me go! Please!" But he didn't let go. He kept dragging me with that inhuman strength that rage gives people, and I kept holding on to the sheets that were already coming off the mattress, fighting, screaming, crying, feeling that my life had ended there. That everything had been useless. The escape, the marriage, the hope of being free, everything had been an illusion. I would never escape him. Never. "You're going to come back home with me," he said, snarling the words through clenched teeth. "And you're going to forget this man exists. Forget all of this ridiculous marriage, this pathetic escape, because you're not his. You never will be. You're my daughter, my girl, mine." In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't my body, despite the pain. It was something much deeper. It was my soul. I felt as if all the air had left my lungs and would never come back. I felt like I was going to die there, in that cabin lost in the mountains, dragged by that man who should have protected me, but who, in reality, was my greatest tormentor, my greatest nightmare, the person who hurt me most in life. And the worst part? No one would know. No one would look for me. We were alone there. That's when I looked at Michael. He was standing a few steps away, recovering his balance after the push, and the expression on his face had completely changed. It was no longer the gentle, quiet man I knew, the one who spoke softly and smiled shyly. His eyes were dark, cold, empty of any emotion I could recognize. But at the same time, there was something burning deep down, way down deep. something I couldn't name, but that gave me a chill that ran down my entire spine. He was no longer afraid. He was no longer hesitating. He was no longer measuring the consequences. He was decided, and in that endless second, while my father continued dragging me and I continued screaming and crying, I saw Michael move. It wasn't a hurried, desperate movement. It was calculated, precise, controlled, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before, as if some part of him that had been asleep had awakened. The storm outside continued roaring. The wind howled through the trees. The rain continued falling like a waterfall on the roof. And inside that isolated cabin in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by pine trees and darkness, something was about to happen. Something violent, something definitive, something that would change everything forever, something that would free me once and for all from that man. But I still didn't know the price that would be paid for that freedom. And I still didn't know who the man I'd married really was. What happened in the next few seconds changed my life forever. Michael didn't shout. He didn't panic. He didn't freeze in fear like most men would in the face of someone so furious and determined as my father. He moved with a calm that was almost supernatural, as if time had slowed down just for him, as if each movement had been planned in advance, rehearsed 1,000 times in some dark place in his mind. I saw everything happen as if I were watching from outside my own body. Fear had left me in that strange state where everything seems very sharp and very distant at the same time. He advanced, but it wasn't a clumsy advance of someone desperate trying to help. It was precise, calculated, professional. It was the advance of a predator that had observed its prey long enough and now finally decided to attack. His muscles moved with frightening efficiency, without waste of energy, without hesitation. He passed by me at a speed I could barely follow, and before my father could react or drag me one more inch, Michael grabbed his arm, the arm that held me by the hair, that caused me so much pain. Michael's fingers closed around my father's wrist like an iron vice, squeezing with a force I could see from the tensed muscles of his forearm. And I saw the expression on my father's face change. First, it was surprise, then discomfort. And then, when he finally really looked at Michael, it was fear, genuine fear. He'd finally looked at the man he'd underestimated, and what he saw in that face scared even him, a man who'd spent his life terrorizing others. Michael made a sharp, quick, precise movement, twisting my father's arm in a way that wasn't natural, forcing the joints beyond what they were made to withstand. And I heard. My God, I heard. A horrible crack, like a dry branch breaking under a heavy boot. Then another crack, right after, this one even louder. 2 places. My father's arm had broken in 2 different places. I could see, even in the dimness of the cabin lit only by the fireplace, the strange shape his arm had taken. My father let go of my hair immediately. His hands, the one that still worked, flew to his broken arm in an instinct to protect, to hold, to try to make the pain stop. He let out a scream I'd never heard come from that man. Never. In all the years I'd lived with him, in all the anger I'd seen in him, I'd never heard that sound. It wasn't a scream of rage or indignation. It was a scream of pure, uncontrollable, visceral, animal pain. The scream of someone who had been broken. He fell to his knees on the wooden floor of the cabin with a dull thud, still holding the arm that now hung at an absolutely wrong, horrible angle. The man who had always been so strong, so imposing, so terrifying in my entire life, was there on the floor at my feet, moaning in pain, reduced to absolutely nothing. I crawled back on the bed, still holding the crumpled sheets, trembling from head to toe, my teeth chattering, unable to fully process what was happening. My scalp burned terribly where he'd pulled me, locks of dark hair scattered on the white sheet like black silk threads torn from the roots. But I was free. He'd let me go. His hands were no longer on me. Michael didn't stop. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He bent down, grabbed my father by the collar of his soaked suit with one hand, the fabric making a wet sound when he grabbed it, and by the throat with the other. His fingers closed around my father's neck, and then, in a movement that seemed physically impossible, he lifted my father from the floor. He lifted a grown man, heavy, over 200 pounds, as if he weighed absolutely nothing. As if he were a rag doll. My father's feet hung in the air, kicking, desperately looking for support that didn't exist. His legs kicked the air uselessly. Michael pressed him against the wooden wall of the cabin with such force that I heard the wood crack, splitting under the impact of the body. Little splinters of wood fell to the floor. A small picture that was hanging nearby trembled and fell. The expression on Michael's face was something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. There was no anger there. There was no hatred. There was no satisfaction or pleasure. It was empty, completely empty, cold. It was the expression of someone who had done it so many times before that they felt nothing anymore. No emotion, no guilt, no doubt. It was the expression of someone truly dangerous. Much more dangerous than my father could ever dream of being. My father tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, tried to breathe, choking. His hands, the one that still worked, and the one with the broken arm that he could barely move, scratching Michael's arm uselessly, nails scraping the fabric of his shirt, eyes wide, bulging from their sockets, full of absolute terror. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my father afraid. Truly afraid. Not anger disguised as fear, genuine fear. Fear of dying. The man who terrorized everyone around him, who controlled everything and everyone with an iron fist, was terrified. He was seeing his own death in another man's eyes. Michael brought his face close to my father's face. Slowly, deliberately. So close their noses almost touched. So close they breathed the same air. And then he whispered. His voice was low, almost gentle, but loaded with a coldness that cut deeper than any scream. And in the quiet of that cabin, the storm outside had considerably diminished, as if even nature had stopped to witness this transfer of power. I heard every word, every syllable. "I know what you did to her all these years," Michael said, his voice cold as the north wind that blew in the mountains, each word chosen with surgical precision. "I saw it in her eyes. I saw the way she's afraid of you. I saw how she shrinks when you come near. I know exactly what you are. I know men like you." My father tried to deny, tried to say something, his lips moving desperately, but Michael's hand squeezed his throat tighter, completely cutting off the words, cutting off the air. "You're never going to get near her again," Michael continued, and now there was something in his voice. It wasn't anger, it was a promise, a conditional death sentence. "Never again. You're not going to look for her. You're not going to send anyone after her. You're not going to write. You're not going to show up. You're going to forget she exists. Because if you come back..." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like lead, letting the silence speak for him. "If you try anything, if you send anyone after her, if you even think about her the wrong way..." Another pause, longer, heavier. "I won't break your arm. I'll rip your head off your body. And it's not an empty threat. I've done worse, for much less. And I won't have a second of remorse." My father's entire body became completely paralyzed with terror. Even the pain of the broken arm seemed to have been forgotten before the real concrete threat he was hearing. He believed. I saw in his eyes that he believed every word. Maybe it was the way Michael spoke, without emotion, just facts. Maybe it was the absolute coldness in his eyes. Maybe it was the fact that he'd broken his arm in 2 places in a matter of seconds, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. But my father believed, and for the first time he understood that he'd found someone stronger, someone more dangerous. Michael released his throat abruptly, but before my father could fall or recover his balance, Michael grabbed him again by the suit, spun him with force, and practically threw him, really threw him toward the destroyed door. My father stumbled, tripped over his own feet that barely responded, and fell face first into the puddle of mud and rainwater that had formed right at the entrance of the cabin. His body made a wet, dirty sound as it hit the mud. His broken arm twisted under him, and he screamed again, a muffled scream from the mud that entered his mouth. He was drenched, covered in brown mud that stuck to his expensive suit, his face, his hair. He was moaning in pain, holding the arm that hung uselessly. He was humiliated in a way I'd never seen. Destroyed. Broken not just physically, but in his pride, in his authority, in everything he thought he was. Michael walked to the door with slow, measured steps and looked at my father down there in the mud, looked down literally and figuratively. And he said, his voice loaded with an authority that accepted no questioning, "Leave, now, and don't come back, because if I see you again, there won't be any talking." My father got up with extreme difficulty, slipping in the mud twice before managing to stand, holding his broken arm against his chest in a protective and useless gesture. The rain was falling on him, weaker now but still steady, mixing with tears. Tears. I had never seen that man cry. Not when his mother died, not when he lost money and business, never. But there he was, crying like a child, broken and defeated. He looked at me, one last time, through the open door. And for a second that lasted an eternity, I thought he was going to try again, that he was going to say something, do something. But then he saw Michael standing there at the door, motionless as a statue, waiting, almost wanting him to try, and something in him surrendered completely. The last spark of fight died in his eyes. He turned, slowly, painfully, and began walking with a limp toward the car that was parked on the dirt road, disappearing into the darkness and rain that still fell. We stood there, completely still, listening to the sound of his boots in the mud, the sound of the car door opening and closing, the sound of the engine starting after a few attempts, the car turning around on the narrow road, the tires spinning in the mud, almost getting stuck. And finally, the sound of the engine getting farther away, getting weaker, more distant, disappearing completely into the night. When silence returned, just the rain falling weaker now, just the wind whistling through the pines, just the low crackling of the still-burning fireplace, Michael turned to me. And for the first time since everything had begun, I was afraid of him. It wasn't the same fear I had of my father. It was different. It was fear of not really knowing the person I'd married, fear of what he'd been, of what he was capable of doing, of what I'd just witnessed. He saw the fear in my eyes. I know he saw it. It was impossible not to see. And something in his expression instantly broke. All that coldness, all that distance, all that controlled violence disappeared. His shoulders fell. His entire body seemed to deflate. He took a step in my direction, his hand extended, but stopped immediately when he saw me instinctively shrink, my body reacting before my mind could process. "Clara," he said, and his voice trembled. For the first time, it trembled. I'm sorry. Sorry you had to see that. Sorry you had to see what I'm capable of. What I used to be. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed. I was processing everything. The man who had terrorized me my entire life was out there, broken, defeated, fleeing into the darkness like a wounded animal. And the man who saved me was here, in front of me, with blood on his hands, metaphorically at least, trembling, afraid of losing me. "I'm not that person anymore," he continued, his voice low, loaded with something that seemed like genuine pain, deep regret. "I was, a long time ago, when I was much younger, before I met you, before I knew it was possible to be different. I was violent. I hurt people. I did terrible things, things I'm not proud of at all. Things that haunt me to this day. That's why I left Knoxville. That's why I came here, to Millbrook, to start over, to let that man die, and be someone different. Someone better. He ran his hand through his hair, wet with rain and sweat, his eyes shining with something that looked like tears held back for a long time. I swore to myself I'd never use that part of me again, that I'd let it die, buried there in Knoxville along with everything I did wrong. But when I saw him hurting you, when I heard you scream like that, when I saw the terror in your eyes, his voice failed completely. I brought it back. I resurrected that man I'd sworn to bury. For you. Only for you. Because losing you would be worse than going back to being what I was. Tears ran down my face, warm, releasing all the accumulated tension. I didn't know what to feel. Fear? Relief? Gratitude? Confusion? Maybe everything at the same time. Maybe no single feeling was enough to describe it. He won't come back, Michael said, his voice firmer now, more confident, returning to control. Men like him, when they meet someone stronger, someone more dangerous, they back down. They're only brave with those who are weaker. They only attack those who can't defend themselves. You're free from him now. Really, forever. And that's when it really hit me. I was free. Really, completely, totally free. The monster who had imprisoned me my entire life had left, defeated, humiliated, with his arm broken and ego shattered into 1,000 pieces. He would never be able to control me again, never be able to touch me again, never be able to look at me that way again, never be able to call me his. It was brutal. It was bloody, even without visible blood. It was violent in a way I never imagined I'd witness in my life. But it was the night I finally, for the first time in 18 years, felt safe. The night I discovered that the man who loved me was willing to bring back his own demons to protect me from mine. The night I became truly free, not on paper, that had happened at the courthouse, but truly free, free in my soul. I got up from the bed slowly, my legs still trembling, and walked to Michael. He stood completely still, not moving an inch, as if afraid to scare me, to make me run, to lose me. I held his face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble against my palms, and looked deep into his eyes. Those eyes that had been so cold, so empty minutes ago, but that now were full of worry, vulnerability, and genuine fear of losing me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice coming out weak but sincere. "Thank you for saving me, for freeing me, for being strong when I couldn't be." He hugged me then, and I let him. I surrendered to that hug completely. We stood there, embracing in the middle of that destroyed cabin, while the storm finally completely passed. The clouds opened up, and the first golden ray of morning sun began to appear through the trees outside, illuminating the beginning of our new life. Today, at my 76 years, I live here in Millbrook, the same town where I was born, where I grew up imprisoned, and where I learned what it is to be truly free. Seems strange, doesn't it? Returning to the place where it all began. But this town doesn't scare me anymore. It's mine now, my way, on my terms. After that night at the cabin, Michael and I came back here. We rented a simple little house in the Oak Ridge neighborhood, far from that big house with the iron gate where I'd grown up. My father never appeared again. Never. We found out later, through acquaintances, that he'd left Millbrook a few days after that night, sold the land hastily, sold the house, and left. They say he went to the interior of Alabama, to a small town where no one knew him. He died about 10 years later, alone. When they told me, I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness. Just nothing. That man had already died for me that stormy night. My mother, poor thing, stayed. She came to live with me and Michael a few years later. We never talked about what had happened. She never asked, and I never told. But I saw in her eyes a silent gratitude. She lived with us until she passed away in 1985, sleeping in the armchair after lunch, peaceful. It was a good death, you know, without pain, without fear, different from how she'd lived. Michael and I had 3 children: Julian, who was born in 1968, Marianne in 1970, and Lucas, the youngest, in 1973. I raised them differently from how I was raised. They had freedom. They had affection without prisons. They had a father who was present, protective, but who was never, never controlling. Michael learned to be gentle without being weak, to be firm without being violent. He became the man he wanted to be, and I was proud of him every day. We worked hard. He continued with carpentry, made custom furniture, and became known in town for the beautiful work he did. I sewed for others, made clothes for the neighbors' children, embroidered wedding trousseaux. We didn't have much, but we had enough. And we had peace. Oh, how we had peace. It was 50 years of marriage, 50 years of waking up next to him, of drinking coffee together on the porch, of raising the children, of seeing grandchildren being born. 50 years of a simple life, but full of true love. He never needed to be that man he was that night again. That stayed stored away, buried, and only came out once, to save me. When he passed, 8 years ago, from a quick heart attack while working in the workshop, I thought I wouldn't be able to continue. But I continued. For the children, for the grandchildren, and for myself. Because he would have wanted me to continue. Today I live in this little house we bought together in 1975, here in the Oak Hill neighborhood. Yes, the same neighborhood where my father's house was, but on the other side, far away. It's a small wooden house with a little yard I love. I have my herb gardens I tend every day. The rosemary has grown so much it's become almost a bush. I have my chickens that give me fresh eggs every morning. I have the apple tree I planted as soon as we moved here, and that today already bears sweet fruit that I make into jelly for the grandchildren. My 3 children live here in Millbrook, too. Julian is an accountant, married to Patricia, has 2 adult children. Marianne is a teacher, like Miss Hilda who taught me as a child, and has 3 children. Lucas is a mechanic, works with trucks, and has a daughter, Andrea, who's my most attached granddaughter, the one who taught me how to use the computer. They come visit me every week, taking turns. Sunday, there's always someone here for lunch with me. We make those old dishes, fried chicken, pot roast, cornbread, biscuits with gravy. The house fills with noise, with laughter, with life. It's so different from that silent house where I grew up, where fear lived in every corner. Every Wednesday, I go to the neighborhood farmers market to sell my embroidery. It's not for the money. The kids want to help me, but I insist on having my independence. It's more for the company, you know? I chat with the other ladies, exchange recipes, find out the neighborhood news. Life is good when it's simple like this. Sometimes, when I'm alone here on the porch, drinking my coffee in the late afternoon, I think about that night, the storm, the fear, the violence, and how that, as terrible as it was my liberation. It was the day I stopped being someone's property and became the owner of myself. I'm not angry at my father. Not anymore. I feel sorry for him. Sorry for a man who loved so wrongly that he destroyed himself and almost destroyed his daughter. But he didn't succeed. I survived. I won. I lived a beautiful life, full of true love, and raised children who know what respect is, what freedom is, what true love is. I look at Michael's picture hanging on the living room wall. The photo was taken on our 40th wedding anniversary, and I'm grateful. Grateful that he was brave enough to use that terrible force he had stored away to protect me. Grateful that he was gentle enough to never need to use it again. Grateful for 50 years of a life I never thought I'd be able to have. Life is funny, you know? We're born in a prison, we learn to survive, and one day, if we're lucky, we find someone who breaks the chains. Michael was my key, my liberation, my home. And today, in this simple house, surrounded by my children and grandchildren, with my garden blooming and my chickens pecking in the yard, I am complete. I am free. I am happy. My dear ones, my loves, if there's someone there listening to me who's going through something similar to what I went through, I want to tell you something. True love doesn't imprison. True love doesn't control. True love doesn't make you afraid. It took me 18 years to understand that. 18 years thinking that was normal, that fathers were like that I had to accept it. But no, my child, no. No one, not father, not mother, not husband, not anyone, has the right to treat you as property. You're not an object, you're a person. You have the right to be free. I learned there's a difference between protection and prison. Protection gives you wings, teaches you to fly, and stays nearby in case you fall. Prison cuts your wings, keeps you on the ground, and convinces you that you were born to crawl. If someone says they love you but isolates you, controls you, diminishes you, my dear, that's not love. That's possession. And you weren't born to be possessed by anyone. I learned that courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and still taking the step. I was so afraid that Monday in January, when I signed those papers at the courthouse. My hands were shaking, but I signed, because living with fear every day is worse than having courage for one day. I learned that sometimes liberation comes in forms we don't expect. It comes brutal, it comes violent, it comes painful. That stormy night was terrifying, but it was my liberation. And I'm not ashamed of having needed help. I'm not ashamed that someone had to be strong for me when I couldn't be. We don't need to be strong alone. We need to find those who are strong with us, not against us. I learned that starting over is possible. It's always possible. I started over at 18. You can start over at any age. It's never too late to choose freedom. It's never too late to choose life. If you're trapped in a house where they control you, where they diminish you, where they make you feel worthless, listen to what this grandma is saying. You're worth everything. You deserve to be free. And there are people ready to help you. There are authorities, there are organizations, there are people who understand. You don't have to suffer alone. And if you know someone who's in that situation, don't pretend you don't see. Extend your hand. Sometimes a word, a gesture, an open door can save a life, can be the difference between staying trapped and finally being free. I had 50 years of happiness after a night of terror. 50 years, 3 children, grandchildren, a life full of true love. It was worth every tear, every fear, every pain. Because today, I am free, and you can be too. Now, my dear ones, I need to make a very special, very important request. If this story touched your heart, if you understood the message, if you feel you need to share this with someone who needs to hear it, I beg you, subscribe to this channel now and turn on the notification bell. Because every week I come here to tell stories of overcoming, of liberation, of women who won. And maybe the next story is exactly what you or someone you love needs to hear to have the courage to take the first step toward freedom. And leave me a comment down below with just one word. Free. Just that word. Free. So I know you watched until the end, that you understood, that you're with me in this chain of liberation and hope. Commenting is quick, it costs nothing, but it means the world to this grandma here. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Because maybe tomorrow you'll meet someone who needs to hear these words and you'll be able to share this video. You'll be able to be the key that opens someone's prison. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are free. You deserve to be free. And I'm rooting for each and every one of you. A big hug from this grandma here. Until the next story.